Growing up, I was a big fan of Tekken 4 and 5. That was mainly because my brother and I didn't have a lot of multiplayer games growing up, and PS2 was the last console that we ever owned. We actually owned several of them. Darn lasers kept breaking. But that is the reason for my big nostalgia towards these two games. And I maybe do keep them on a pedestal compared to other entries in the series. But what can you do? One game that doesn't have that same place in my heart is Tekken 6, because I haven't played it for the first time until 2020, and I only realized that it existed once a trailer for Tekken 7 was announced. So there are no rose-tinted goggles here. And I disliked the game once I found out what they've done with its story. It just didn't feel like Tekken anymore, at least from what I've seen, since I have only seen the key cutscenes. So I finally got my hands on it, and I will play through the story to see what really happens. And is it as bad as I think that it is? But before that, make sure to like and subscribe, as it helps a lot. Thanks. I really thought that I could only focus on cutscenes to find out what's going on, but the producers thought that the best way to get the context to the story was to have it in a 30-second narrated comic book, which is narrated in Japanese. So you have to read it, and no one likes to read.
I didn't know you could read.
First actual cutscene of the series starts with our new main protagonist, Lars, and his crew of rebel Mishima Zaibatsu soldiers, who are supposed to be Jin's army, raiding a lab and finding Lars's future robot anime waifu sex machine. Well, he finds Alisa. Jax raid that same lab, and every single person in Lars's crew dies. Aside from main man, of course. Even bigger cliche is that he loses his memory. Something that the writers are very fond of doing, it seems. 3 games in a row now. Good job, guys. I want you to comment on who you think will have amnesia in Tekken 9. I'm guessing Kazuya. Since, and this is a spoiler by the way, John finds him unconscious at the end of Tekken 8 story. Anyway, and amnesia helps Lars to bond with Alisa since he forgot that she could be dangerous or whatever. After almost an hour of playtime, we finally get to see characters that are familiar to us. Jin, Nina, and Eddie. Oh, by the way, Eddie is speaking English in this game, and he is by far the worst voice actor of the game.
So what now? They're another Tekken force we're talking about. We can't afford to have them running loose. They're not kidding around. Are you gonna wait until it's too late? We've already lost 2 key positions. What?
Of course, everyone is mysterious, so we don't find out much. But we know that Eddie is forced to commit war crimes and kill innocent people because Jin promised to save his teacher, Christie's grandpa by the way. So Eddie killed thousands of people just to save one grandpa, who dies by the end anyway. Crazy stuff right there. I will speed things up, but I just wanted you to see this as well, since it shows what kind of a lunatic Jin is supposed to be. And especially since Lars' story doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And it is so stupid that the story focuses so heavily on these two, while Jin started the war for no real reason it seems, but instead of focusing on his inner demons or his change of character from just a last game, we get to see romance develop between a man and an android. This honestly feels like a fanfic and not the actual main campaign of the game. So Lars and Alisa now travel around the city, and they find some of our favorite characters along the way, as they search for Heihachi Mishima, because Lars' friend told him that that's what he was up to before, and that the encounter with Heihachi might help him recollect his memories. But they are being followed by this mysterious Zafina character, who thinks that Lars might be a savior of the world.
或许，最终他们才是拯救世界的关键人物。你眼光不错，或许他们真的能做到。
He can.
Immediately after that, Jin flies to the desert to find the temple. But guess what? That same Zafina is already there. A woman must have access to portals, I guess. Anyway, we finally understand a bit more of the story as Zafina gives great exposition to us. So I'll let her do the talking.
6 months have passed since the magic that binds this place was broken. And now events are unfolding just as the legend foretold. This world is headed for destruction.
Azazel, a demon lord, is about to be set free and destroy the whole world, as if Jin hasn't already done that. In this conversation, we get a hint that Jin might be a good guy after all. But this good guy arc is done in such a stupid way, and you'll see why later on. But let's get back to our new main guy, Lars. He finally finds Heihachi, and that helps him bring back all of his memories. We find out that Lars is another one of many kids that have some relationship with Heihachi, and he is Heihachi's bastard son from his mission in Sweden. So, what is he doing in Japan? I don't know. His mom went on a search for his dad, I guess. And this encounter with Heihachi is the best cutscene of the entire story mode. Heihachi steals the show here. But I'll just let some of this stuff speak for itself.
おはんのじじいめ余計なことを
抜けるなんていけないことです。
そやつの方がよほど物分かりがいいようじゃ少しは見習ったらどうじゃそんなものでこのわしを倒せると思うな。
サーカスに転身したらどうだ。
ほざけ小僧。
Now, Lars finds out about the location of this epitaph that Heihachi stole some time ago, and he is on his way there. But this doesn't have any meaning to the main story, as it isn't even mentioned anymore. So there is no point in this entire encounter. It's a filler story inside a filler story. Now, this isn't the only time that the plot stops, by the way. Remember Eddie? His story basically just ends after that first cutscene. He is later defeated as a stage boss, and that is all we see from him. Nothing more about Jin's betrayal, or whatever is going on with him. Lars goes on to meet new companions, such as Lee, who will be somewhat important later on. Rest of the stuff is not that important to the story, and it's basically filler, so I'll skip most of it. Especially since cutscenes don't make much sense when you watch them back to back. They are supposed to be complemented by intro dialogue to levels, but that also doesn't make much sense, because you don't have to play a campaign with Lars, due to characters having special interactions, and you lose out a decent amount of context of the story. Or it might just be that the story doesn't make any sense at all, and it's probably both, honestly. This is one of the reasons why I stopped playing after about 2 hours of gameplay, since cutscenes are available by downloading a save file or by just watching them on YouTube. But let's get back to the story. Lars' friend Togu dies in an ambush along with the rest of the squad that was there that day. We are supposed to care, but this guy didn't do anything except call us a few times. So I can't really care that much. Next cutscene is Lars and Alisa being chased by Urgot from League of Legends, only to be saved by Raven, who was following them in secret the entire time.
地の情報を教えてくれないか。
はい。これから向かう場所は市街地。
A lot happens in between, because in the next scene, Lars finished his fight against Jin, and here we get one of the biggest betrayals in anime history, as it turns out that Alisa is Jin's personal bodyguard, who Jin commands to kill Lars. If we didn't get retcon on Jin in the next two games, I would consider him to be supervillain, because in this and a few following scenes, he comes off like the biggest asshole on the planet. He is written so inconsistently, as he used to be so indifferent to everyone, hence the Jin walk, but in this game he simply acts evil. he lets Lars form a bond with Alisa only to defeat him with that same Alisa, destroying him not only physically but mentally as well. And he makes him fight Alisa twice, leading to Lars almost killing the poor girl. And after all that, the only thing Jin has to say is that Alisa is a worthless piece of junk. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're allegedly a good guy, you wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff or talking to people that way only to defeat a greater good. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Lars defeats Alisa for the first time, and him and Raven form a bond, since Lars needs a companion in the game mode that you play through the entire story, and they head off to the desert. And yeah, you don't play standard Tekken in the story mode, you play the worst iteration of Tekken Force that we've had. It's not necessarily bad, but it gets tiring after a few hours, especially because you have a companion, and stuff like this can happen, since AI is not that good. Lars and Raven eventually find their way to the temple and they find Kazuya, who is only featured here and in another boss fight in the entire story. And just like Heihachi, Kazuya only has a few minutes of screen time. Given that the two of them and Jin are on the cover of the game, this seems way too low of screen time for me, especially since this is the first fully animated story that they've ever done. Even Jin isn't featured enough. But we have to get to the dumbest part of the story, and that is Lars beating Azazel. Yes, this great threat, the biggest one ever, is defeated by a commander of the rebel group, and not some higher being. Not even Heihachi has beaten anything supernatural, aside from Devil Kazuya, who was weakened by John. Does that mean that Lars could in theory now be the biggest threat in the world? I guess so. How have we never heard of the dude until now if he is on par with Jin in his power? And Jin is hailed as the strongest one ever. Speaking of Jin, we get the second encounter between him and Lars. And that's where the scene with Alisa happens that I was talking about earlier. So Lars defeats Alisa again. This time he beat her up so hard that he fried her CPU. And she's shutting down. But not before having this tear-jerking speech about how she fell in love with Mr. Sweden here.
私を人として接してくれた
Jin calls Alice's scrap metal, which enrages Lars even more and causes him and Jin to have another fight. Allegedly Lars wins, but they are both standing up and talking as if nothing had happened. And we get Jin's wise man talk about him and Kazuya being the reason for Azazel's awakening, since they possess the devil gene.
アザゼルはすでに精神体として復活を遂げていたからだ。奴の復活は必然だったとでも言うのか。俺とカズヤ、二人の存在が鍵だった。
What? But their existence has only awakened Azazel's spiritual form. So Jin started a war to manifest his physical one, because Azazel allegedly feeds off negative energy and chaos in the world. But how does Jin know that? Did Azazel give him instructions in his dreams?
万物が発する負のエネルギーで。
Oh, sorry, but if I heard voices like that in my head, I would probably go to my doctor asking for schizophrenia medication instead of starting a world war. Weirdly, Jin is not a schizo, rather he is correct, and he turns out to be a good guy by the end. But not before he has a crazy speech about how he is a true savior of the world, and that he started this war for the sake of humanity. He is speaking just like the greatest dictators of our history. Just as he is done with his speech, Azazel appears in front of him, in his true form this time. But Jin simply defeats Azazel One Punch Man style. Only Jin supposedly dies along with Azazel. But not for long. So when you recap the entire story that we've been through, Lars' story is just a filler that doesn't have anything to do with the main one, aside from two encounters with Jin, which doesn't really matter to Jin, but it somewhat matters to Lars' story. If there were no Lars in the story, literally nothing would change in the main storyline. Jin would still start World War III, and he would still defeat Azazel with no help from anyone. And even worse, Alisa wouldn't need any repairs, and she would still be alive. So we took part in a nothing story that is on par with the Tekken movie for how dumb it is. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Alisa is taken in for repairs in Lee's laboratory, and she gets fixed up for Tekken 7. The worst part of the story is the writing of Jin. One minute he is a cruel, ruthless bad guy who blackmails his own staff, and the next he has a master plan on how to save the entire world. Then again, he has the diabolical plan to ruin Lars, who is really inconsequential to him. And the next moment he is sacrificing himself for the greater good of the world. But even then, his sacrifice is not something that is simply done to save the world, but it is done to set Jin free from his devil Jin. So is he even considered a good guy in the slightest here? I am not really sure. By his actions he's supposed to be, but by his demeanor and motivation, he really isn't. Until he gets retconned in Tekken 7 then. There we get some poor excuses about the devil corrupting and controlling Jin, but then in Tekken 8, the devil is supposed to take care of him. I don't know. The writers had to make this so convoluted that even they don't know what's going on. Thankfully, they didn't continue with the evil Jin storyline, as that would be such a stupid way to have it all play out, especially if Lars was our main protagonist from now on. Nothing against him, but he isn't the lead man material. He is better suited to his new role of holding Kazuya down for a few minutes while Jin recovers. Also, this game mode is not really that fun. I adore Tekken Force mode in both Tekken 3 and 4, but this is just too much of a good thing, I believe. And the controls are a bit weird on this one, since it has two different sets of controls while in and out of combat. But I guess that I would get a hang of it in a few more hours. I just didn't like how repetitive it was, especially if I had to play it for 4 or 5 more hours. I think that I would really start to hate it. There were some positives though. I did like that you unlock different stuff with it, and some levels have really fun ideas, such as Bear Forest and Sumo Street ones. But sadly, I just didn't feel the need to commit more hours to it. I definitely will explore more of this game once I get the chance, because I think that I have underestimated it because of that awful story. Also, I just didn't like Azazel. He didn't fit into the Tekken universe for me. The series is about personal vendettas, so having a magical god as the boss just doesn't feel right. But what do you think of Tekken 6? Both story and the game in general? Let me know in the comments. That will be all from me. Thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.